welcome to Marriage Matters. I'm Dr. Mark.
And I'm Liz. And we're your marriage and communication coaches, here to inspire, instill hope, and empower you to weather the challenges of married life. Today, Mark and I are here to talk about becoming aware and learning how to stop resentment from destroying your marriage.
We fall in love. We decide to get married because we are in love. We decide to have that beautiful commitment and to take the journey through life that we see as this beautiful approach to bringing us bliss, happiness, and in fact, providing us connection and love throughout our entire life.
But just like any relationship, Mark, marriages are difficult and there's going to be ups and downs, and they need nurturing. They need you to put effort into it and time and focus. And we need to, be realistic about that.
We do. We frequently refer to marriage as a garden. And you walk up and have this beautiful garden. And if you tend it and nurture it, it remains full and vibrant and beautiful. It remains something that gives you a bounty for your entire life.
Right, but we also talk about marriage as a roller coaster. And you do a wonderful description of that, so tell us why you say it's like a roller coaster.
Imagine you're getting on this car and you and your spouse are hopping in. There's two seats. The seatbelt goes on, the safety bar comes down, and you're excited for this journey ahead, this beautiful journey of all these beautiful things. And you're excited. It's just you and your spouse, and you're ready to take off. And for the first part of it, you have that honeymoon, and it's beautiful. And you're riding up this wonderful glide, and you're starting to see these beautiful vistas. And sometime for everyone, what happens is all of a sudden that perfect spouse starts to morph, to transform back into their really human, imperfect self. And all of a sudden you see that this journey that you're on and these vistas, as you're about to fall off that first run in the roller coaster, are full of falls and twists and turns and barrel rolls. And all of a sudden it becomes clear that all the things you thought were just this blissful approach to marriage are really just life.
Well, think about it. I'm chuckling to myself because I'm thinking you get on a roller coaster and you're so psyched and you're heading up. And again, similar to marriage, you get to the top and all of a sudden you look down and you're like, oh no. And that is sort of what it's like. I mean, we have to be realistic. When you're walking down the aisle or having your ceremony to get married, you have on these rose-colored glasses, and you should. You should. We're all in that cloud nine. We're all in that high. But that's not realistic. You can't maintain that throughout years and years of marriage because life happens, stuff happens. And we have to learn how to get through those things. And if we don't tend it and treat it like a garden, like you said, inevitably we're going to have these issues that, where you feel maybe ignored or you feel that you're not communicating well. And then what happens? Your marriage starts to deteriorate. And when two people start to deteriorate, their communication falls apart.
And when that happens, resentment creeps in. And it can be from one side or from both. But resentment is a very unique emotion. There's an emotional charge around it. As we talked about once before, you feel it.
It's like a tension. When there is resentment, there is tension. And there's so many different ways to feel resentment. But first it starts where you feel like your differences are magnified. And the next thing you feel is that you're bickering more. And before you know it, you feel like you're in different camps.
You know, it's really interesting because people think of resentment as anger, and anger is the root, but anger is something that we have, and it's when our mind doesn't believe that we've gotten what we deserve. Resentment builds on anger over time, and it's this persistent sourness, this persistent distrust, a persistent distance between another person. And that is very different than just being angry.
Well, I love what you just said, because for some people it starts out different ways, or maybe they experience it different ways. So you said sometimes it's like a distance. So it's just two people who are just sort of existing in their lives and sort of ignoring the real things that are going on. But for other people, it can be like living a battlefield instead of a haven. We all get married because we imagine that we're gonna have this beautiful, blissful life together. And when you're walking into your own home at night and you feel like like you're in a battlefield. Like, it's really a horrible way to exist.
And that's really a good example in a battlefield, because we associate the battlefield with a post-traumatic stress. And that's because the battlefield goes on and on and on, and there's not this break in it. Well, resentment is a hurt, it's a disappointment, and it's a lot of other negative emotions that have built up over time and then persist. And it's that persistent aspect of it that you don't really break away from it. And it's very different again than anger. And we can take crisis or stress for a period of time, but when it goes on for a long period of time, that's really when we start to have challenges with it.
Well, and what do Mark and I always say, part of this happens is because we all want to be, every person wants to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be understood. And when we don't feel like we're being seen or we're heard or we're understood, then we start to, our relationships start to fall apart. We start to have those difficulties, and then ultimately it leads to contempt and it leads to hate. And then where does that go? It ends up in separation or potentially divorce.
It's rare that resentment goes away on its own. And it's not a matter of just putting a smiley face to it. It's not a matter of just simply learning the love languages again. It's not simply a matter of doing those nice things or trying to connect. You've got to deal with resentment, and you've got to deal with the issues that have brought it about, because you really can't whitewash resentment. You need to focus on it. And in fact, resentment that is not properly dealt with will build and will continue and will grow bigger and bigger, and it will literally eat your marriage alive.
As you know, as a doctor, as a cancer doctor, we've used the term before, resentment is like a cancer. And over time, it metastasizes, I think that's the word, it builds up, and if it's not, I think what we're trying to say is you can't push resentment under the rug. You can't just say, okay, we have some resentment, now let's go to the movies. It's not like that.
It isn't, and that going to the movies, that the date night starting, whatever, is not going to take the resentment away. And you're exactly right. Resentment is a cancer, and a cancer spreads insidiously, persistently, and silently. And it's not until all of a sudden it gets big enough in a certain area or another area that you realize that it metastasizes. And it makes it impossible for a healthy relationship to survive. So I'd like to paint a troubling picture about resentment and cancer. We've all seen that patient, that human being who is just withering away. They're literally emaciated, and they're down to skin and bones with cancer. And you're trying to put nutrition in, and they just get thinner and thinner and thinner. And they eventually are so wasted that they literally can barely move, and they wind up dying. The same thing happens in a relationship. When resentment is present and you try to fill it with those nutritional things that would have normally been good, the date night or the little bit better communication or the gift or whatever, the vacation, it doesn't fill it because the cancer's still there. It's like putting food in and not having taken care of the cancer. You've got to take care of the primary problem, which in this case is resentment. And there are ways to do that. It frequently will take the help of a professional because it is a challenge to get rid of. And you've got to really root it out at its very root, at its very core, and you've got to then heal it. Otherwise, it's just still there.
And Mark and I are, again, we're marriage and communication coaches, and resentment stems from a huge lack of communication. And people allow it to happen not on purpose, but because it's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to be vulnerable. But unfortunately, some of the communication issues that come from resentment are when a person doesn't feel heard, not feeling heard in your marriage, when you feel disrespected, when you really don't feel like you're aligned with your partner, that your partner's not treating you like an equal.
And sometimes resentment can come about because of regret. we moved because my spouse had a great job opportunity and I hate where I live. I don't have friends, I'm having a hard time connect, so you resent that they made you move. Or maybe you wanted another child and you decided not to, and because of that, you harbor ill feelings and that resentment toward your spouse because you feel that you regret having done something. Regret is one of the most really destructive feelings that any one human being has. And when you start to put that into a marriage, that really erodes it.
And then what about the couple who always wants to be right, or the one person in the marriage that always has to be right? Mark and I see this all the time.
All the time.
And it is a destroyer of marriages, because you have to ask yourself, is it more important to be right, or is it more important to have your marriage? And that is an eye-opener for a lot of the people that we work with when we say that, because they're obviously coming to us because they want to repair whatever the damage is done. But when we sit back and we hold up a mirror and we see what we see, and this wanting to be right, it's really a destroyer, and it is a lack of communication, because it means the other person isn't being heard at all.
We talk about this frequently in what we call integrative thinking, and it is so prevalent that we don't think in an integrative fashion. If you talk about religion, if you talk about politics, if you talk about so many different things, people don't understand that a point of view is just that. A viewing point is the ability to become all-encompassing. When you can shift from a point of view to a viewing point and see your spouse is 6 and you're 9 and everything in between, now we come to a place we understand that just because you're right doesn't mean that Mark is wrong. And that is a transition that brings us to transformational conversations instead of transactional, superficial discussions.
Yes. And another communication problem is when one person is selfish. When a person is in a marriage and they only care about themselves, whatever it may be, whether it's only care about making their own meal, only caring about they have to get up and get out to go to the gym, they don't care if the wife or the husband needs help with the clothes, whoever's, not the clothes, the kids, the dogs, the cats, whatever you have to do in the morning, your jobs. Selfishness in marriage is another destroyer. It brings on a lot of resentment. And the last one I think I'm going to mention is when a partner feels that they're being taken for granted.
Yes, and I want to just step in for a moment about the selfishness, because selfishness, the question is, what is the outcome you're looking for? Sometimes it's really important to be selfish, to be selfless. We always want to bring the best of ourselves into a conversation, into that relationship. We want to be there, present, fully ourselves, fully alive. But if we don't take care of ourselves, if we're not a little bit selfish, we come in as hollow. So it really is important to understand what's the outcome. If you're working on you in order to bring something better, that is really important. On the other hand, if it's just for me, then that's actually a big problem. Well, it's time for our commercial break, and we'll be back in just a few moments.
And we promise you that we will be giving you some tips and strategies on ways to try and stop and prevent resentment in your marriage when we come back. Hi, and welcome back to Marriage Matters. So before Mark and I get started on helping you to get some tips and some strategies on how to prevent resentment, we also want to have you be aware of some of the signs of resentment, because you might be the person in your marriage that isn't resentful and you don't know what to look for. So the first thing to look for is a lack of intimacy. And we don't just mean in the bedroom. Intimacy is so much more than what goes on in your bedroom. Intimacy is holding hands. Intimacy is sitting next to each other on the couch. Intimacy is eye contact.
Exactly. It's the ability to truly connect with that other person that's special in your life. It's the ability to literally feel their energy and to let them feel your energy. Again, to be fully engaged.
Yeah, and let's be clear on that. When you're fully engaged, it means paying attention to your partner. It doesn't mean just sitting next to them on the couch and being on your phone. That's not what we mean by intimacy. Intimacy is being aware that they're there and acknowledging them. And again, it is the #1 thing to look out for as far as your partner being resentful of you.
When communication starts to break down, it's typically because we're not hearing, we're not understanding, and therefore we start to bicker. Bickering is a sign that there is an erosion in that relationship. Bickering is not just having the occasional argument or disagreement. We're seeing things a different way and agreeing to disagree. Bickering is an issue that comes from really not being heard and not being understood, and that's really important.
And another one is that tension that you talked about earlier, Mark, because tension is something you feel. Tension it's like a weight in the room. It's people call it the elephant in the room. They probably say that because it's just a weight. And when you feel that tension coming from your partner, you know something's not right. So again, these are just some signs. Another thing could be if your partner tosses out comments about separating with you or getting a divorce. Just tosses it out there.
Or even just a lack of trust itself. Let me see this or let me see that, or I need some proof. If there's a lack of trust starts to erode, and that's a little bit later on in that breakdown of that relationship and the connection.
But now we get to the good part. Now we're going to share with you some ways to prevent resentment and hopefully stop it in your marriage. So the first way to do that is by setting an intention. Mark and I are so big on intentions. Yes. And setting an intention is knowing, in a sense, your why. Why do you want to repair this marriage? Why do you want to make it better? Understanding what that is.
And where do you want to move forward? It's different than a goal, but a goal in a sense is a secondary step. So when you know why you want to do it and what the outcome is, the goal is the steps that allow you to move toward that outcome.
Yes. And the next one is to be open and expressive, which is, again, a huge communication skill. And you would think when people are married that would be an easy thing to do. Well, a lot of people who've been together for a long time, actually, instead of coming together and growing that openness with each other, that it sort of falls apart over time.
Well, we describe it as authentic, and authentic communication is really that. It's transformational. What do we mean? Well, honey, will you get the kids this afternoon, or I'll take the dog out. That's a transactional discussion. That's very superficial. I need to do this in order to get that. It's just taking care of business. And authentic conversations, when you really have that deep conversation, you may be sitting on the couch, you may be sitting across from each other at the table, you're looking at each other and you're truly involved. That's an authentic, open conversation. You express yourself with authenticity and you express yourself with openness so that that person understands what you're telling them, including all of your emotions.
And then you move to active listening. If you're actively listening, you're listening not just to hear the words and listening to respond. You are actually listening to understand where your partner's coming from. You're giving them the floor to understand their emotions. And then hopefully you can have the floor to share yours.
Exactly. Active listening is exactly that. It's active, it's not passive. You actually have to pay attention. And one of the most important ways to let people know is to ask questions. Okay, I'm hearing you say this. Well, why do you think that? Or I'm not certain I really understand exactly what that emotion is that you've been feeling.
And that helps with the person who wants to always be right. If you ask that person, please help me understand where you're coming from, it can ultimately, hopefully, open up a dialogue and not have it just be this one-sided, I'm right all the time kind of thing. So
exactly.
Another one is to acknowledge and validate. Who doesn't want to be acknowledged and validated? That's a very big thing as coaches that we tell people.
Yeah.
All that we want is to know that we matter. That's all that we want as human beings.
It really is, and it's one of the most powerful things in the world is to let someone know that they matter. You acknowledge them, they're being seen, you acknowledge that you hear them, and you acknowledge that you not only understand them, but that their feelings are valid, that what they believe, what they feel is real and true to them, because it is. We say it over and over, our perception is our reality. Each person perceives the world, and although we think that we're in the same space, we really aren't seeing things exactly the same. So being in that position to validate what they're saying, what they believe, doesn't mean that you agree with it.
I was just going to say that. You don't have to agree. You're just validating what they have to say. You're validating their opinion, you're validating their emotion, you're validating their thoughts, and you're making them feel heard and acknowledged.
And the amazing thing is when you start to actually be authentic in your expression, when you're actively listening in the conversation, when you are acknowledging and being acknowledged, when you're validating and being validated, now you start to really become able to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is such a huge strength. It really is. It's an amazing, amazing strength. People think of it as a weakness, and it's not.
No, it's not. It's not. And when you're vulnerable, it's important to be clear and direct about how you feel and what you're saying. And by being clear, we mean more of the how you talk to people to explain something like you would explain something to an 8-year-old. We're not saying dumb it down for your partner, but that is what clear means. It doesn't, you have to make sure that they understand your words, what it is you're saying. And if they don't, find another way to say it. Because clarity is a huge part of communication. If you don't understand, you're going like this rather than coming together.
I mean, it's kind of interesting, but if we go back to an old Dr. Seuss book, which was Horton Hatches the Egg.
Mark loves this.
And it's just so exemplary of exactly what we talk about. I said what I meant, and I meant what I said. An elephant certain 100%. When you're expressing yourself authentically and vulnerably, you're saying exactly what you think. Part of what we need to also understand is that our words are only about 7% of what we're actually trying to tell another human being. And 55% is our body language. How many of us intentionally use our bodies to let someone know what we're feeling? We read it immediately. We all read body language very quickly. It's innate. But very few of us actually help to suggest to someone what we're feeling by helping with our body language, our eyes, our face, our shoulders. If we're tense and we pull back, or if we're relaxed. If your fists are grabbed or if they're open. All these things send messages that are so important in being clear and direct in your expression of your feelings.
And lastly, if you really feel that you can't communicate this with your partner and you're both really struggling, but you're in this marriage together and you do want to make it work, seek professional help. It always helps to have an outsider to coach you through something, to help you see where you are and where you want to go, rather than staying stuck in these conflictual conversations over and over and over again, or the ones where you just feel completely isolated, where you're not talking at all.
And the folks watching will notice that we had limiting judgment right before that. The reason we chose to put limiting judgment right after is because if you look at it and you say, okay, we're going to get some help because we're having trouble. A lot of people put judgment around that, and I'm weak, I'm not good enough. Limit the judgment. It's interesting, the people who study neuroscience and psychology, our brains talk to us. It's that voice in our head, and it talks to us anywhere from about 12 to about 60,000 times a day. That's that little voice in our ear. And 80% of those are negative. 80%, you're not good enough, you're not loved, you're not able, you're not this, you're not that. And we judge ourselves, but then we become insecure. We turn around, we judge our partner. And that judgment causes separation. We say it over and over, and if you've been watching the show for a while, you've heard it. The only thing we're perfect in is our imperfection. And we have to put a little bit of that ability to eat crow and to understand we're all not perfect. Let's not judge our partner. Let's open ourselves up to their thoughts, to their importance, the way that we did when we first started to meet them.
Yeah. So resentment, yes, resentment can destroy marriages, but it doesn't have to. Again, it does take work. It takes coming to an agreement that you want to repair your marriage and you want to have better communication and dialogue. And one way to really do that is to just start by talking about your feelings. And we're not saying this is easy. Again, if you're having difficulty with it, seek help. But if you can just consider it as baby steps. Mark and I always talk about this in coaching. Don't expect to have Rome be built in a day. Do the baby steps. Ask your partner to sit down and have some of those real conversations and see how you do.
Find that alignment and vision and purpose. Find that ability to become intentional together. That's a great start, because now you're not only aligned, but you're working on something with a common goal and a common purpose. So many times people come to the empty nest and they've been so long in taking care of this and that and running that they're not even sure exactly where to go. If you start that dialogue, you can really begin to heal your marriage. You can have those discussions. You can be authentic, and you can ask questions.
Absolutely. And again, resentment is like a poison because it lacks empathy and it lacks compassion, which is the sweet spot of any relationship. When you feel that things are being given and taken, that's what makes a marriage feel so beautiful. So again, it doesn't have to be, it does take work. But we're hoping that some of these strategies that we brought to you today, so first of all, the understanding, but then some of the strategies that we brought to you today will help get you thinking about how you can improve your marriage by stopping or slowing down some of that resentment that's already starting.
And if you need help, find somebody, please. Your marriage, your life together is so important. So we want to thank you for joining us again for Marriage Matters. We love hearing your comments and your feedback. We love your suggestions of topics. So please keep those emails coming. You can reach out to us at marriagemattershosts@gmail.com. You can see our website at Twin Lights Coaching. And please reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts, your concerns, and let us help you to have that wonderful, resilient, enriched marriage.
Or if you even want to be on our show, too. So thanks so much for joining us, Marriage Matters. Have a great day.
Have a great day.